We're coming to you from the DraftKings.com podcasting studios. DraftKings.com, America's one-day fantasy sports site, where it's like a new season every time you play. DraftKings.com.
Now, the right time with Bomani Jones on ESPN Radio.
And ESPNRadio.com.
So, man, last night, we hard-working people, man. So we came here and did some sports radio while you guys were watching Monday Night Football. Shannon, I don't really understand how this works. I mean, here we are putting on this Dynamite radio show, and they're going to counter-program against us on television with football. Like, how are you not doing your audience a disservice right now, Mickey Mouse?
The nerve, folks, the nerve.
That's what I'm saying. The people out here like, how are you going to force us to not get our right time in just because you got some football on? So shout out to all you millions of Americans who made the right decision and listen to us. Now, I'm going to fill you in on some things about the game, though, because I had a chance to watch some of it, talk to some people. Look here. It's only one game. I am not inclined to overreact about one game. And that's crucial because, like, if I'm talking about Jameis Winston, for example, and I'm not overreacting, then I kind of got to not overreact about just about everything else, right? Like, that's what it is. However, I just want to give you something to think about as it relates to the Eagles, all right? Let's start with the assumption that Chip Kelly is a genius. Like, let's just go ahead and begin with that, because I don't want to argue about whether or not he's a genius. I don't want you to think I'm being a smart aleck by calling him a genius. Let's just say that he's a genius. Shannon, you down to rock with that?
If you say so.
Right, just for now. Let's say he's a genius. I'll say this. At the very least, I'd be willing to call him a bit of a visionary, right? I mean, there are a lot of things that he's doing that nobody else is doing, and things that I think are correct and are challenges to conventional wisdom. The way he handles practice, for example, the workload he gives to his players. I mean, I'm a little spooked out by all the tracking and stuff like that they do, but, you know, how much sleep you're getting and stuff like that. But it's ahead of his time. Like, he's the first guy that's on it, and everybody else is going to be jumping on that stuff behind him. Like,
Absolutely.
I think he's legitimately a visionary. Like, I think that's fair to say. Here's the thing, though. All that stuff is the practice stuff and everything. That's going to affect things at the margins, right? Like, if you're dealing with two teams that are pretty much of similar talent and everything else, at the margins, all that other stuff is going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
However, the thing that always matters more than anything is talent, right? Talent, then I think you get to strategy, and then you kind of get to the rest, right? Talent and strategy. Now, who deals with talent on a football team? The general manager. Or however you want to title the general manager, you know who I'm talking about. Who handles strategy? The head coach. These are Chip Kelly's two jobs, right? He's both of those guys. Now, at some point, we're going to have to separate the idea of Chip Kelly as visionary away from Chip Kelly as coach GM. Those are really two separate things. And the visionary part is almost the secondary importance to the other things. Now, the way I'm seeing it, Chip the visionary is kind of sort of getting undone by both Chip the coach and Chip the general manager. Now, what I do think we saw from the game yesterday, and the telephone number is 888-729-3776, they lack bodies in some important places, most notably the offensive line. Their guards were getting thrown around. Like, that was the thing you kept hearing about over and over again, was that the guards were getting thrown around. Now, please understand this, though. Chip Kelly can explain it to you, why the guards are getting thrown around.
Yeah, you know, we talked about it earlier last week. I was really impressed in preseason with their defensive line, and I thought, you know, Claiborne and Babineau inside are kind of disruptive forces early. Defensive ends did a good job, you know, so we started to try to attack a little bit more in the second half on the outside, get the ball to the perimeter, and then obviously because of what they were doing, we felt like we could throw the ball, and that was the best way for us to move the football.
Shannon, was he talking about the Falcons' defensive line?
Disruptive forces for Claiborne and Babineau?
Babineau, bruh. Babineau.
Well, he was describing them like he was talking about the Williams guys with the Vikings back in the day. Like he was talking about Pat and Kevin Williams.
Right. Yeah, I got Sam Adams and Tony Siragusa. Like, I mean, who are you?
Forces.
Who are you fooling right now, Chip? Really, who are you fooling? But, Shannon, here's something I didn't realize. Did you know that the Eagles did not draft an offensive lineman in the last two drafts?
That's not good.
Now I saw Brian Solomon. He writes about football for Forbes. He was talking to Chris Brown of Smart Football, who's one of the best followers you can find on Twitter, at Smart Football. And they were having a really interesting discussion about that. They haven't drafted an offensive lineman in the last 2 drafts. They didn't pick up an offensive lineman in free agency in this offseason. And they cut whom some would argue was their best offensive lineman in Evan Mathis. So where did the offensive lineman come from? Like, how do you do this with the offensive line if you're getting rid of guys and not bringing anybody in? Like, how exactly does that go? Now, take that to another level that I think is pretty interesting. And they brought this up in the same discussion. Like, I am lifting other people's conversation right now, but I think it's interesting, and they can do this better than I can, so I'm going to do it for them. When you let Deshaun Jackson go, and you let Jeremy Maclin go, you have to replace them, right? You got to get other receivers. And they've tried to do that through the draft, and that's cool. But when you draft receivers, what does that mean you can't draft? Things like offensive linemen. See, the thing about college football is if you need an offensive lineman, you just go get an offensive lineman. Like, there's a tier of players in college football, like maybe the top 30 or 40 dudes that are like head and shoulders above everybody else. After that, man, them dudes is about the same.
They're interchangeable, yeah.
Yeah, by and large. Like, those cats are about the same. And part of why you could make it work at Oregon and why Chip Kelly's system was such a good fit at Oregon is that as long as those guys were fast, it didn't really matter if they were big. Like, you ever notice that all the guys they got running around with the ball are little bitty fast guys, right? And that's cool because the system prioritizes speed, and in college you can get away with having little bitty fast guys. In the league, little bitty ain't getting you very far in any sort of way. Like, I know Darren Sproles is still out here getting his eye job on, but, like, little is not going to get you very far no matter what your size is. The guys that you're looking for in the league are not interchangeable. You can't just go find another one of them, right? That's a major difference between personnel in college and personnel in the pros. Chip Kelly's running personnel in the pros right now and trying to deal with this and a salary cap and everything else. That's a whole different world from anything that he's dealt with before. And he's been one of those guys that managed to make a giant jump in his career and make it work. He went from the University of New Hampshire to Oregon, and he made that work. So I can totally understand being like, I could do this at the NFL level because he made that jump. And in a lot of ways, he has managed to make it work. But look at that team that's out there, Shannon. They don't have the bodies. Like, that's what it looked like in watching that game. Like, you got Sam Bradford out there. Does Sam Bradford look like exceedingly talented to you even after he gets it done in the second half? No, he just looks like another guy. Those guys on the offensive line, they look like guys. And the question's going to be, all that science and all the strategy and all the plans and everything that he's got, does it matter if you don't have the bodies?
So let me ask you, is Chip Kelly, the general manager, doing a disservice to Chip Kelly, the head coach? Or is Chip Kelly, the head coach and strategist, doing a disservice to Chip Kelly, the general manager?
Well, that's what I was about to say. Chip Kelly, the head coach. One thing about Chip Kelly that I find fascinating as we discuss him as the visionary is he does things that seem light years ahead of everybody else. Now, a lot of the stuff he's doing is like, part of why him moving to the league wasn't that big a transition is some traditional NFL stuff, like the inside zones, the power runs, and all of that stuff. It's traditional NFL stuff. The route concepts that people tell us about apparently are like traditional NFL stuff. The thing about Chip Kelly, and this goes back to Oregon, when they were out there playing those squads that they could, blow away, they did all that cool stuff and they took all those chances and everything else. When it came down to games that were tight, he looked a lot more like a conventional football coach. They weren't losing shootouts at Oregon. When he would lose games, it'd be games that were like 17-14. Think about that BCS championship game. It didn't look like the future. Those games don't look like the future. So now look at last night. That game's close at the end. They're going down the field. They got a fourth down, and the odds say go for it. The forward thinking says to go for it. But Chip Kelly was out there looking just like any old other football coach you've ever seen, and then it was time to kick a field goal, and the field goal got missed. Right. So Chip Kelly, I think, is a good coach. I think they've had good enough results to show that he is a good coach, certainly. But all the genius stuff and everything else, you don't need to be a genius to win a Super Bowl. Lots of guys who aren't geniuses have won Super Bowls. There's some things that you got to figure out. You got to figure out how to get the talent in there. You got to figure out when to take these chances, when not. But at this point, Shannon, people are telling me that it's almost like he's down to running 2 running plays. Like he's never run a whole lot of running plays to begin with, a lot of different looks and stuff.
Right.
But it's down. Chris Brown of Smart Football made this point. He said it looked to him like it was down to 2 running plays, and you could tell by the formation which one of them was coming. And that's an interesting thing about Chip Kelly. As far into the future as he is, it's the right now part I'm not sure he's quite got a handle on. Because you got to draft offensive linemen. It kind of matters.
Bomani.
Shannon Byron Maxwell got set on fire yesterday.
Speaking of the Cowboys, though, Maxwell has to be breathing a sigh of relief after Dez Bryant's injury, no?
Yeah, buddy, because let me tell you, I personally would not want to have to see Julio Jones one week and then Dez Bryant the next. Like, that's just a bad setup as is, right? That one's difficult. But after Byron Maxwell got toasted by Julio for 9, 141, and 2 on Monday night, can you imagine what would happen if he got lit up by Dez Bryant the next game?
In Philly?
In Philly. Because they are not going to be happy to see you, Byron Maxwell.
Do they check for batteries when entering the link?
Look, man, here's the thing for Byron Maxwell. The last thing you want to do is be a corner that makes the locals mad. Because they can never get past it. They can never let it go. It's just not possible. Like, in a big money corner at that, ask your man Asamoah about that. Remember that? It's almost... I've almost forgotten that Nnamdi Asamoah had played for Philadelphia.
Big money, too.
Dude, he went from being considered one of the 2 best corners in the league to being that corner in the drop of a dime. And it wasn't even all his fault. They were putting him all over the place, having him do all kinds of stuff he's not supposed to do. Next thing you know, he's out, married to Kerry Washington, out the league. And he don't even be showing up places with her. Like, he just disappeared. She stayed the red carpet for Dolo. Like, where's Nnamdi? Oh, he's at the house talking about, I'm working out for teams. Wink, wink. Nobody calling that dude. Nobody. But that was Byron Maxwell. You see after the game where they told him, the reporters had the cameras on him when he found out Julio's stats.
Right.
The 9, 141, and 2 touchdowns. And he promptly used the Lord's name in vain.
He had a genuine reaction, though. He
did have a genuine reaction. Then after that, he was like, 2 touchdowns? Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that screen. Like, he got lit up so bad, he couldn't even remember all the uplighting that took place. He could not remember it at all. But every football fan, I've said this for years, we could turn on the phone lines and it would be a flood. Everybody has a defensive back they hate. Everybody. It doesn't take you long at all to think of the defensive back you hate. Shannon, who you got?
C.C. Brown, can't cover Brown, former Giant safety.
Charles Demery, former Falcon, the one who let Jerry Rice get 5 touchdowns on him while Deion Sanders watched from the other side. But Demery got an interception in that game.
Could you only imagine how much Deion lit him up in the locker room after that game?
Oh, God.
I did my job.
It probably took everything in him not to punch Deion in the face, like at that moment when that took place. Deion putting activator in his hair and putting on his 7th gold chain, telling you about how you need to step your game up. Right? But as I've always said about the Falcons, I grew up with the Falcons, and I've always said this. I hope Jerry Rice thanked the Falcons in his Hall of Fame speech. Because if he didn't, he's an ingrate. Because nobody did more for Jerry Rice's Hall of Fame career and Hall of Fame statistics than the Atlanta Falcons. Like, basically the Falcons were his Washington Generals. That's who they were. Jerry Rice could have been out there spinning the ball on his finger. Nobody would have been able to tackle him. Nobody. Hitting Charles Demery in the face with some confetti. Like, it could have been any of those things. They were just getting lit up. And now Byron Maxwell, I recommend he have a very good game. An interception would probably be a good way to start, try to bring the faithful back around to you. Because, Shannon, if they go down 0-2 in Philadelphia, they are not going to be pleased.
One positive, though, for Maxwell is that the check cleared, right? He got his money, right?
Check cleared. Got that up front.
He has that working for him.
Well, I did tell you what I noticed about Byron Maxwell, though, in the course of that game, is that Byron Maxwell was doing that stuff that he used to get away with in Seattle. All that pushing and all that grabbing and everything else, nah, it wasn't going down this time. No, sirree, Bob.
And there's a couple other things that are missing is Chancellor, Thomas, and Sherman as well from that secondary that Maxwell was used to.
And there were a lot of indicators that this one might not work. And it might still work. Let's be clear. It's just one game. It might still work. But it was ooh, boy, he needs to be glad he had that game on the road instead of at home. It's hard to recover. Like, between he and DeMarco Murray, you couldn't feel so good about Chip Kelly's brand new school clothes. Because that's what those free agents are, basically. They're your school clothes, right? Your back-to-school clothes, your new clothes for when you get back to school. You ain't got these. That's what it is.
It's like Chip Kelly's new school clothes were the hotness last year.
Yes. That's exactly.
These ain't the Jays that just came out. These were last year's Jays.
Yeah, he got some cross colors in 1993. Like that's what it looked. Look, they got DeMarco Murray. They ain't get anything out of DeMarco Murray with 8 carries, 9 yards. He got a touchdown, good for him. Didn't they make a move to get Ryan Matthews? What do you have, 3 carries for 4 yards or something like that?
He's the new Nietzsche.
Yeah, but he got a touchdown too. Right. But if these were the guys that you were getting excited about because they were replacing the other cats, it couldn't have been a good week 1 for you. It just could not have. And Byron Maxwell, boy, I recommend you get an interception. It's Tony Romo. He used to be good for those, but now Tony Romo's good, so I don't know what to tell you. I do think that there's some mess cleaning up that had to be done after the Andy Reid era. The question is how he's going about cleaning up the mess. And if your line's bad, you probably should draft some offensive linemen. When you let the receivers go, they have to be replaced. You have to draft them early, right? This is how it goes in the league. You can't just go out and get a bunch of recruits. And I think that would have to be the hardest part to figure out, making the transition to the NFL in a salary cap era. It would seem to me the hardest thing to figure out is how do we go about getting this talent? Because you just can't go about it the way that you did in college. So I think most of what you're saying is there's some fairness to that. But how long are you willing to give it? How long is this going to take? And we'll see if this looks like a team that's close to winning a Super Bowl. Because I've heard people say that they're picking the Eagles to go to the Super Bowl. And I just think that's people talking. Because I just don't see logically how you could reach that conclusion based upon the bodies they have there, the talent that they have there. They don't seem to have the body. So, yeah, there needs to be some time to clean it up. But you also have to be good about how you clean it up.
Bomani.
Shannon, you are a Giants fan, as I like to talk about every time these Giants stories come up, largely because they're never good news for the Giants.
No.
I don't know the last time you guys had some good news to offer us. But you hear your man, Jason Pierre-Paul, as you may know, he had a fireworks accident that resulted in losing a finger. That's all we found out at first was a finger. And then we found out, index finger, kind of important one. Trigger finger. And then, there was some ligament damage to his thumb, right?
Right, which was a concern because the amputated finger, they felt, okay, that he can get by with that, but the thumb was the concern.
Right, and then we found out that maybe there were other fingers missing.
Possibly.
Parts of other fingers missing. Frank Schwab at Yahoo, I felt so bad for him because he's got to write up a post about how basically Jason Pierre-Paul has even less hand than we thought he had before, and you have to figure out what the right way it is to type that out. And so he said apparently they found out about more missing finger, and I'm like, missing, like it's lost? You put in a report with the police? Right? But I don't know. There's no good way to say that, though. Like, it's not his fault. It's just what it is. Well, apparently, Shannon, the tip of his thumb is not there.
Yeah. The thumb, now that's a digit that you're going to need.
Yeah. That's a very, very important digit. Like, that's 5. You know what I'm saying? That's what rounds you up, that thumb.
Now, this you have to go back to when the injury first happened, and Pierre-Paul didn't want Giants officials to see the severity of his hand. And now, getting this information about his thumb, now we can understand why, even more so.
By the way, I think we need to give Jason Pierre-Paul a real measure of credit for the fact that it's been this long and nobody actually knows how many fingers he has. Like, he's kept this pretty close to the vest. He has done an amazing job of concealing a fairly relevant piece of information. And so I would talk about this with Dan Le Batard, and Dan would talk about how he thinks Jason Pierre-Paul is trying to force himself into free agency. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, I was never quite sold on that idea. And the reason I wasn't quite sold on that idea was nobody knew how many fingers he had. Like, they had somebody in the waiting room at the hospital trying to stop anybody from coming in and seeing his hand. This has not been a game of chicken. Jason Pierre-Paul is trying to save whatever it is he's got. It sounds like he's trying to get out there and get this franchise tag money because he may never see a contract offered like that ever again.
Yeah, he's out here trying to get any money he can. And now there's been reports that the Giants are going to reevaluate him in about 5 to 6 weeks. And if you're the Giants, You can't blame him. You gotta try to establish what the market is for him now.
Well,
like, what can he give you?
I don't think there's any market. Like I think, let's be clear at this point. If the tip of his thumb is gone and he's already down a finger, ain't no market, right? Somebody gonna have to see you. They might be a market, but it'll come with some serious incentives, right? He's missing what, $870,000 a game?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
He's trying to get out there because let's be clear, that's $870,000 a game he was counting on. Like, missing checks is one thing, but, I mean, he was counting on this money. He ain't never made money like this before. Coming into this year, he's like, nah, it's cool. I'm just going to sign my franchise tag and get this $870,000. It's straight. Can you imagine not like 900 G's a week that you thought was coming and it ain't coming?
And you have no one to blame but yourself. That's what probably hurts more than anything else. It'd be one thing if there was something that happened and involved but this is you. This was your action.
But don't think for a second he ain't tried to find somebody to blame. I know I would. I tell you, just on GP, I'd have called my lawyer and been like, we're going to sue the fireworks company. It was defective. Because it can't be my fault. Oh, no. Like, I might admit it when nobody's around, but I'm going to take careful inventory. Because if it's my blame to take, I'm going to take the blame. But I think a thorough investigation is necessary before we do anything crazy like that. I'm checking everything out.
Oh, yeah, his story has to start with a see. What had happened was...
Yeah, like, all right, it's not what you think. I think that's where it begins. It's not what you think. But, I legitimately feel bad for him, though, because it's not like he was doing anything malicious. Like, it was just an honest mistake. Like, can you imagine if the worst mistake you ever made in your life might cost you $14 million in your career? And it wasn't... I don't think he was doing anything especially reckless from what I can tell. He's shooting fireworks off. Like, maybe I'm just country, but I just don't see that as being, like, the thing.
Now, judging by the fingers that are potentially lost here, though, I don't know what he was doing or which fireworks, but if it's a thumb and an index finger, I have to assume that he tried to pick it up, no?
Yes, that would be the thought. I'd also like to know what fireworks it was that he was playing with so that I, myself, will never play with them.
Right.
Like, I'm much more curious about that than how many fingers he's got. Like, I don't care about the Giants. I mean, I wish him the best, but I don't care about the Giants and what happens to them. But I need to know, what are these fireworks that blow your hand off? Because remember, the other dude blew his hand off playing with fireworks this summer.
Yeah, for the Bucks, yeah.
Who knew? I had no idea.
Bomani.
Steve Patterson is the athletic director of the University of Texas. I got $5 that says that most of y'all did not know that until today. Today you learned that because Steve Patterson got fired. Well, actually, Shannon, Steve Patterson says he resigned.
Yeah, sure.
They let him say that he was resigned. Hey, man, I've been fired from a lot of jobs, okay? This whole I resign thing, either you quit your job or you got fired. There's really not a lot of in between there.
He should have just allowed the Texas president to come out and say we decided to go in another direction.
Yeah.
That like usually works with head coaches, right?
Yeah, like the only way that your resignation is like, it's only a resignation if it's done in disgrace. Like, that's when you're actually quitting your job and just resigning because it's getting too bad. Like, but even then, that's getting out before the cavalry shows up. That's basically what it comes down to. You're getting out before the cavalry shows up. Anyway, they cut Steve Patterson loose today. He's only had that job for 22 months, and anybody who knew anything knew that it was going to end badly for Steve Patterson there. Let us never forget that Steve Patterson was once the general manager of the Houston Rockets, and he wanted to trade Hakeem Olajuwon for Ronnie Cycli.
What year was that? What year did he try to do this? Was it
like
prior to 94?
Yeah, like 92.
Oh, now I really hate this guy because he should have made that happen.
Yeah, then John Starks wouldn't have gone 2 for 18 in Houston. He'd have gone 2 for 18 somewhere else while shooting the Knicks out of a championship. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe.
Okay. But yeah, like, Steve Patterson tried to run Hakeem Olajuwon out of town. It didn't go so well for him when he was in Portland, and he got this job as athletic director at Texas, and he is a Texas grad. I don't really understand how he wound up getting that job in a lot of ways, because Texas hired a consultant firm to look into such matters, and they said to hire Oliver Luck, Andrew Luck's daddy, who now got a fancy job with the NCAA. Nope, they went and hired Steve Patterson. Like, I don't know which of those dudes he had on his side to make it work for him, but they hired Steve Patterson. And now Steve Patterson is gone. Now, you are probably wondering, why is it that we're talking about an athletic director? To be honest, I've wondered that as I've seen people talk about this athletic director on TV all day long. People don't really care about that stuff. generally speaking. Now, I understand the irony of me saying that people don't care about these things while I'm here talking about these things, but you're just going to have to work with me for a second because ultimately there will be a point that I think you will appreciate. Now, the reason we're talking about this is Charlie Strong. That's it, right? Because the firing of the athletic director then raises the obvious question, which is, if they hire another athletic director, is that athletic director going to want to hire his own football coach? History tells us that generally the next athletic director will want to hire his own football coach. That's generally how it goes. Now, Strong just got that job. Just got it. So it would be crazy to think that after 2-3 years, unless there's some awful season this year, unless they go 2-10 or something like that, it's hard to believe that Strong will wind up getting fired after this season. It's difficult. But there's really only one reason that we're here with this, right? Now, I do understand every coach in America is under pressure, right? There's no coach in America that is not under a significant amount of pressure. But that pressure is generally localized. In college sports, rarely, if ever, is there like a national push for a college football coach to be fired. It just generally doesn't work that way. Those things normally happen locally. But Charlie Strong being the coach at Texas is a national story for this one reason that we cannot deny, which is that Charlie Strong looks a lot more like me than like Steve Patterson. Like, that's why we're here. We wound up here with Red McComb saying that he thought that Charlie Strong was a position coach, maybe a good coordinator, but wasn't the guy to coach at the University of Texas. Why'd that become a story? Because Charlie Strong is black, right? Now, there were reasons to raise questions about Red McCombs, but that's why we're here. That's why this story is a thing. And I have a question. For all the people that act like this racism and stuff doesn't exist, it doesn't matter, can you then explain to me why it is that Charlie Strong's been on that job for a year and 2 games, and whether it's going to work with him has been such a national topic of discussion? Now, some people would then make the argument that, well, this network that I'm on is in part, how to put it, ESPN, that Longhorn Network thing, right? Mm-hmm. ESPN's in on it. I wasn't figuring out the right technical term to use, but they're in on it, right? They're in on the Longhorn Network. And so the argument would then go that since they're in on the Longhorn Network, the Longhorns then become more of a national topic of discussion, right? You think the Longhorn Network that the University of Texas is in on wants to sit around all day long talking about whether or not the head coach is going to lose his job? Like, what kind of conspiracy would that be? That's not why we're here. We're here because at every turn, people think that Charlie Strong is going to get fired. Now, there's the group of people that think that Charlie Strong is going to get fired, and then there's also a group of people who just basically think that Charlie Strong I forgot which one I said first. Did I say should first, Shannon? Or did I say will get fired?
Yes.
Will? Yeah, okay. There's the will and the shoulds. And I don't think the shoulds actually watch any Texas football. But there's the woulds and the shoulds. But this has been a topic since the beginning. Remember last year when they were putting guys off the team and the question was whether or not Charlie Strong's brand of discipline was going to work? What, the brand of discipline that says that you can't smoke dope and you can't beat women? I thought that happened everywhere. Like, can't steal. Like, there was nothing new about that. Like, they were acting like Charlie Strong was going to lose control of his locker room because dudes kept failing drug tests. Like, now you got a problem with drug tests? This is the time you got a problem with drug tests?
And he was telling his kids to go to class.
Yes! Yeah, you can't do that, Charlie. These kids don't want to do that. But then you say they get paid with education. But it's been fascinating to watch. Here's my view on this. Does the athletic director leaving help Charlie Strong? I don't think it hurts him. The reason I don't think it hurts him is he wasn't especially close with Patterson. It's not like Patterson was his boy. It's not like Patterson was his guardian angel. Because I think a lot of us thought that for Strong to get that job, he was going to need some guardian angel to look out for him with all the boosters and everything else, right? But that wasn't Patterson. Like, Patterson wasn't the guy that was going to save Charlie Strong. Because as soon as the heat got on Charlie Strong, Steve Patterson was going to do whatever it took to keep Steve Patterson straight. There was never going to be any looking out for Charlie Strong. There wasn't going to be anybody putting out their net for Charlie Strong. Not that dude. It absolutely was not going to be him that was going to be the one to do that. And I think that anybody with some measure of common sense or the ability to evaluate that program can recognize it. So it doesn't help if the athletic director that hired you is gone. It doesn't. And it does raise questions about what happens when the next athletic director comes on. Now, if Louisville's Tom Jurich gets hired as the next athletic director, then Charlie Strong is fine because that is his football coach. That'll work itself out. If Oliver Luck comes in, there's a good chance Charlie Strong will be fine. Because you can look at that roster and realize the last coach left you a terrible mess. Like, it's there. But the boosters haven't run Charlie out yet. The president and the regents seem to have Charlie Strong's back. We can't do this with him, though, where we're always looking for an excuse to talk about whether or not he's going to get fired. So if Texas is 3-6, then okay, we can talk about whether or not he's going to get fired. That's a legitimate thing to do. But on this one, we're leading the news off in sports with Steve Patterson. Think about how crazy that is. Really, just think about how crazy that is. It doesn't matter if this is the biggest athletic department in America. Y'all don't care about athletic directors. So why do we care so much on this one?
So let me ask you, because it's one of the larger athletic departments in the country, is this the best AD job in America?
Well, I think it's interesting because it doesn't appear to be a job that has a spectacular level of pressure. Like, Texas won a national championship in 1969 and didn't win another one until 2005, but the Lost Dodds had that job for 30 years. Now, they won at all kinds of other sports and everything else. Like, don't get me wrong, Texas got all that money, and that money comes up on those non-revenue sports. They won at all of those. They're great at all of those. But this is the University of Texas, and the Lost Dodds was allowed to keep a head coach that won the conference 2 times in, 16, 17 years. Does that sound like a job that has a whole lot of pressure to you? Because it doesn't sound like a job that has a whole lot of pressure to me. So, you're telling me that you could only win 1 national championship in your time and 2 conference championships during the best era of play that the school had had in the last 40 years. And you get to retire? And then you get to play with all that money and with all those programs? Best athletic director job, that might be the best job on earth. How could I be down?
Bomani.
He hosts the show on ESPN Radio in Dallas. He also is a columnist for the Dallas Morning News and on occasion appears on a television program you may have heard of called Around the Horn. His name is Tim Cowlishaw. Tim, what's going on?
Oh, it is a pleasure as always to be here.
I appreciate that greatly. How you feeling about Steve Patterson being asked to move on at the University of Texas?
Here's a man that, probably hired a really good basketball coach, may have hired a good football coach. We certainly don't know that yet, but it could turn out that way. And he gave 100,000 fans beer at football games. And he's going to be the most hated AD of all time.
That is it. I forgot about that. His legacy at Texas, if nothing else, will be that they now sell beer at Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium.
Yes, just to make a little more money there for the athletic department.
And
but
to be fair,
it's hard to alienate people the way he did. And I've talked to people. Now, I know if you read stuff in the Oregonian in Portland, that he had some rough times up there. But I know people who knew him in the NBA, and they said he was not like this. So I don't know exactly what transpired that turned him into this person.
I just know that he tried to run Akeem Olajuwon out of town and trade him for Ronnie Cycli, and I don't know how that man ever got a job like managing
I didn't know that either.
Like how? Like how does this guy ever get a job after that? But, no one asked me my opinion. Talked to Tim Cowlishaw at ESPN Dallas. So this is interesting. The Cowboys, Dez Bryant has a broken foot. He'll miss at least 6 weeks. And it doesn't feel like the end of the world for the Cowboys. Is that a new sensation for you, that something this big doesn't feel like everything's going to go to hell?
I think the only reason it doesn't is because what we saw last year, although what we saw last year was mostly DeMarco Murray and Dez, and we're not going to see them, and what we see in the rest of the division. And it looks like the Eagles may be more of a work in progress than we thought based on last night. But it still could end up being much worse. I think people still are, okay, they saved their butts in that game and they won when they shouldn't have. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Tom Coughlin. But it could still get bad here the next few weeks because they don't have a go-to receiver. They don't have an elite running back. They don't have anything that really scares you other than Romo. And I don't know how a quarterback scares you when he doesn't have great weapons. I guess you can say that about Tom Brady at times, but he always has Gronk or he always has something. And I don't think the Cowboys have that right now.
But they do have the best offensive line on earth, and maybe that's the security that they're betting on, right?
Yeah, and it looked like for most of the night, Randall was running, he finished 16 for 60-something. So, if it's not 5 yards a carry, but if it's 4 yards a carry, and he'll have some games, he or McFadden will have games where they break a couple runs, and it could be okay. It just won't be as steady as it was last year. But now you throw into the mix that Terrence Williams is your number one, and assuming you still consider Cole Beasley a slot receiver, Devin Street is your number two. Lucky Whitehead is your number three. I mean, it gets thin pretty quickly. That's why they're making trades with the Raiders.
All right, that guy you just said would be their number two receiver. I'm looking at the box score from the last game, and his name does not appear anywhere in it. What was that name again?
Well, Devin Street, and he's the one who got destroyed on that little Tony kind of floated a pass over the middle to him, and he got blown up, and it turned into an interception down to the 1 yard line. So he was a fifth-round pick a year ago and has played very little except for preseason.
All right, we're talking to Tim Cowlishaw, ESPN Radio in Dallas. Now, you mentioned the rest of the division. They play Philadelphia this week, and goodness, Byron Maxwell has to be glad he's not going to see Dez Bryant after what happened with Julio Jones.
Yeah.
But, with that game, the Cowboys can kind of take control of that division in a very meaningful way if they wind up being 2-0, and the rest of the division could end up being 0-2.
Oh, they could, yeah, and that obviously there's a real chance of that. Now, here's what I think about Philadelphia. I think the Falcons, I don't know how much preparation they put into that Eagle offense, but I'm betting Dan Quinn put a lot, more than 1 week. And the Cowboys won't have that. They have this week to try to figure it out. And they did real well against it once last year, and they did terrible against it once. And so we'll have to see. I got to think DeMarco Murray will have a little bigger day Sunday than he did last night.
Now, one thing that's interesting, though, is that we're putting the Cowboys in an odd position because I think they finally figured out last year that the best way to use Tony Romo is to not ask him to do so much, and now they're going to have to ask Tony Romo to do just about everything. Is there a fear in your mind that the old Tony Romo comes back under those circumstances?
Yeah, because even last year, if you look at it, he threw 35 passes, and he got sacked 29 times. He still gets sacked behind this offensive line a lot more often than, say, Eli Manning does behind the Giants' offensive line. And if he's going to go back up to the 600 pass attempt days, which certainly he threw 45 in the first game, so certainly they're headed that way right now, he's going to get hit, and he's going to get hit harder than he did last year. And at some point, that 35-year-old body, he's going to pay a price for that. But they're feeling extremely confident based on last year and based on this first game of what he can do. And I don't know if he can do that for 16 weeks.
All right, we're talking to Tim Cowlishaw of the Dallas Morning News. How about the defense? They did not look bad against the Giants, but this is a defense that last year was 27th in net yards per passing attempt allowed.
Yeah, it's such a confusing defense because they were second in the league in takeaways, and I don't really know what that means because that seems to be a stat that a team can be second 1 year and 20th the next. There's some teams that are good at it a lot because they got good DBs and they get great pass pressure. This team got very average pass pressure, and they're hoping to upgrade that to make them better. But now, they already didn't have Greg Hardy till week 5. Now they don't have Randy Gregory, their second-round pick, probably till week 5. So they're kind of back to the same thing of not having much of a pass rush and having to do it other ways.
Tim, I have to admit that your answers are kind of belying all the optimism I said that your Cowboys folks had. Everything has actually been kind of...
Well, I'm trying to bring a little sobriety to this show, which is what I'm known for lately, the last few years. But at the same time, I think the Eagles have a lot of holes, and I don't think much of that Eagles defense. So this is your first time out to play 60 minutes without Dez. I don't think this is a bad defense to go against. They're going to get some yards, and they're going to get some points against the Eagles.
All right, last question for Tim Cowlishaw. It had to be a welcome change of pace, to have a game end like that, and it's Tony Romo that comes out as the winner as opposed to being the loser. Because it's not as much fun for us non-Cowboys fans. It's not nearly as funny when Tony Romo doesn't fall apart. But you guys had to feel good finally watching it be somebody else to fall apart.
The norm for him is the standard for him is still that game 2 years ago against Peyton Manning when he throws for 500 yards, but he throws an interception at the end of the game, and he's the GOAT. It's 51-48 or whatever it was. This was one where he did everything in the fourth quarter, and it is still unbelievable that now I don't understand people who don't get math, but I don't understand Eli Manning thinking under any circumstances. We're 3 points ahead. A touchdown here is a bad idea. Don't score. I don't get how he actually told Rashad Jennings, try not to score on these runs. That is incredible.
Why can't we have a helmet cam so we can see everybody's face when he said that? Right? Like, what's it like while you're standing there and you guys are trying to go out here and get these points, and Eli's like, look, whatever you do, don't score. And then the dude throws the ball out the back of the end zone. Like, how do you look at Eli Manning at that moment?
And Rashad Jennings is saying, okay, I guess I don't need to score. I'm not sure why, but he's Eli Manning. Everything, that incomplete pass was just, that was a gift because they were never going to go that distance. And actually, the Giants should have tried for the touchdown on 4th and 1 after that. So Coughlin screwed that up. They just did as many things wrong in the last 2 minutes as you can possibly do, and the Cowboys thanked them for it.
All right, Tim Cowlishaw, check him out on ESPN Radio in Dallas in the afternoon. He's a columnist at the Dallas Morning News, and he occasionally loses to me on Around the Horn. And by occasionally, I mean whenever he faces off against me. Yeah,
occasionally, and I don't know when that's going to be, but hopefully soon. Hopefully that'll happen soon.
Sounds good, man. Part. Good to talk to you, my man. I'll catch up with you soon.
All right, take care.
Bomani.
So, Shannon, after we got off work, did you go home and watch the last Monday night game?
I did. I watched the Minnesota Vikings and that other team that I didn't recognize in those all-black uniforms.
Yo, dude, the uniforms, I don't feel like teams like the 49ers need to do that amateur stuff myself. If they want to kick it old school, do the shadow throwbacks like they wore in the Super Bowl that one time.
Look, you won the Super Bowl in throwbacks. If you're ever going to throw it back, you need to throw it back to those every year, and I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I'm good with it. They were great jerseys. Deion Sanders, after all.
Still gives Stan Humphrey's nightmare.
Oh, God, I can't imagine what it would like to be him that day. 888-729-3776 is the telephone number. But I thought I saw the second half of it, and a couple things. I didn't watch the first half, so I don't know how bad the quarterbacks did or did not look in the first half. But in the second half, I heard the way that people were talking about Bridgewater and Kaepernick, and I thought I was watching a different game. Like, neither of them played well. Like, I couldn't say that about either of those guys, although Trent Dilfer was all about some Colin Kaepernick in that game.
Dilfer, it sounded like one of his passing camps, like he was doing the Elite 11 when he was doing the color commentary.
He was excited about it. But the thing I will say, though, is I wonder if people did lose sight of the fact, though, that Kaepernick looked different. Like, we could get into better at a different point in time, but he looked to be different. Like, the way that he held him, like, took care of himself in the pocket, the way he stepped up in the pocket, just the way he handled all those things. He looked different, and he was still able to run the ball and be effective in that way. Like, if I was a 49ers fan, I'd be encouraged by what I saw there. What would discourage me, though, do they have anybody that can run fast?
Not named Colin Kaepernick?
Yeah, I mean, really, like, I'm looking on the outside there. Like, if it's not Vernon Davis, because you remember, the year after they went to the Super Bowl, when Crabtree was hurt, Vernon Davis, well, I guess even before then, but Vernon Davis was like the only perimeter threat that they have. Like, you have Anquan Bolton, who's good to have because he's always open, because he can catch anything, no matter the traffic, whatever it is, he can manage to get the ball, but he's not threatening. They don't have anybody threatening that I saw.
Well, they have Torrey Smith. I'm not sure. Did he play last night? I couldn't tell. I was here like you doing a radio show. So
yeah, but I tell you this: I watched the second half of that game, and I had completely forgotten about Torrey Smith until you mentioned it right there. Like, maybe he could wind up being that guy, but they didn't one catch, okay, because they didn't seem to have anybody threatening out there. Now I ain't watching any film, any all 22 or nothing, so I don't know. Maybe Torrey Smith was open all day and they couldn't get him the ball. I have no idea. But give this to the 49ers. Part of this, of course, was the Vikings playing horribly. But the 49ers over these years have been stockpiling picks, right? They were always a team that's going in there with a zillion draft picks. The reason you do that is guys are going to get old and you have to replace them and you hope to get them for cheap. And you never know who those guys are that you're going to get. So Alden Smith had been a problem. They knew he was a problem. They got Aaron Lynch. Okay, he's going to be the guy to come from the outside for that team now. Frank Gore, we knew he was going to get old at some point, right? They finally made the decision last year not to keep betting on Frank Gore being okay the next season. So they had Carlos Hyde. And Carlos Hyde's rookie year, I thought Carlos Hyde at times was Frank Gore. Like, I thought they were the same person. And then I watched him last night, and I'm not saying that Carlos Hyde is going to have a career as good as Frank Gore's, because that's too much to ask for. Like, I think Frank Gore, Hall of Fame argument to be made for Frank Gore?
With no ACLs? Absolutely.
There's an argument to be made, right? But I never saw Frank Gore striding on the outside like Carlos Hyde was striding on the outside when he was breaking through. I never saw him. He didn't have that kind of dynamic ability that I can remember. Now, much of Frank Gore's prime was spent while the 49ers was sorry, so maybe I just wasn't watching the games and he was doing stuff like that. But Carlos Hyde was striding on him, Jack.
And he was reversing the field very well. That's one thing. You thought that Hyde would be more of a bruiser, but no, he's pretty fast once he gets to the outside, and he can change direction. And it seems as though the game is slowing down for him. I mean, he's the guy. He's the number one now. So he played like it last night. The thing that I'm concerned about with the 49ers, we talk about all the guys that the Niners have lost, especially on the defensive side. But if you look at the offensive line, they lost Davis, who retired, and they lost Ayupati. Ayupati, how you pronounce his last name, the guard. That's big. Yeah. That's big, because so much of the 49ers' identity over this over the Harbaugh era was running the ball and controlling the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, now let's see how it goes, because I think Jeep Christ is their offensive coordinator. I looked that up. I don't know anything about him other than he's kin to Paul Chryst. And we know what Paul Chryst likes to do, the head coach of Wisconsin right now. We know what he likes to do. He likes to run the ball. And I don't know anything about the line that the 49ers have right now. They do still have Joe Staley at left tackle. That ain't a bad thing to have. But you're right. Anthony Davis quit his job, and Upati went and signed somewhere else.
Arizona, yeah.
Yeah. All this being said, the Vikings looked bad. They looked bad. Like, I didn't think that Teddy Bridgewater looked bad in the part I saw. Again, I didn't see the first half. In the second half, you saw the things that encourage you about Bridgewater, but apparently the first half was when he ran into his own man and they all looked like a bunch of suckers.
And we talked about lack of speed on the outside for the 49ers. Reverse it, flip it to the other side with Minnesota. Where was Cordell Patterson?
Well, they got Cordell Patterson. They got Mike Wallace. Cordell Patterson, look. We don't know what to do with him. Nobody can figure out what exactly to do with Cordell Patterson. They can't figure out what there is for him to do in the NFL. Like, running routes, gotta say, of the things that happen in the NFL, that's high up on the list of things that must be harder than it looks. Because you wouldn't think it would be that hard, but apparently it's very, very difficult. Because he can't figure it out.
And, at the NFL level, you just can't rely on your athleticism. You gotta have technique as well.
Because everybody's fast. That's the thing about the league. Like I said, that's what Jameis Winston's learning. Those linebackers are as fast as the DBs that you were throwing it on before. Like, everybody's fast in this league. You can't make it in this league pretty much if you're not fast, right? But for Minnesota, are you worried about Adrian Peterson?
It looked a little different last night. I know that Peterson, in his first game action back since his suspension, I know he's used to running behind a fullback, and I didn't see much of that last night, if any. And he was running horizontally a lot. Usually, Adrian Peterson attacks the line, makes a move or two, and is gone. That didn't happen last night.
Yeah, see, the horizontal stuff doesn't worry me as much, because if they're going to run more stretch stuff, one cut and go, I think Adrian Peterson could do that, right? Like, that's it's not as though that's a game plan that I don't think that he could have. Now, it's worth noting, though, I think that part of the reason that Adrian Peterson was running horizontally was because if he ran straight ahead, all he was going to do was run into bodies. There was not a great deal of room for him to run. So it was difficult for me to draw any conclusions about where Adrian Peterson is. The only thing I'll say, Adrian Peterson is 30 years old. It is possible that for Adrian Peterson, last year was going to be the year that it stopped all coming together, but he didn't play. So he's had a year of rest. He's had a year where he didn't have to take that pounding, and maybe as the year goes on, that'll bear itself out. But we cannot forget in this, man, he's at that age where running backs generally start to break down. And he ran for those 2,000 yards in 2012. He ran for 1,266 the next year. But, Shannon, here's what's funny about that. Here's how unfair the standard is for Adrian Peterson. I could say to you that Adrian Peterson averaged 1.5 yards per carry fewer in 2013 than he did in 2012. That's because he averaged 6 yards a carry.
Yikes.
6 yards a carry in 2012. I didn't know that was possible if you weren't a quarterback. 6 yards a carry. So I'm just going to say, I think until it's just clear it ain't going to work, I think Adrian Peterson's going to be okay. But, man, they got to block. Their offensive line looked awful, because they weren't doing Teddy any favors. They weren't doing Peterson any favors. Did anybody on the Vikings play well anywhere? Anybody?
There was that one guy. No, not him. Then that player who did the thing. No, not him either.
Look, like I say, I didn't watch but the second half, so I'm just asking. And, man, I did not feel good about myself watching that second half either. I was like, I can't go to sleep. Like, maybe I'm taking my job a little bit too seriously. I can't believe I'm still watching this.